The silence on the bridge of the HCS Retribution was a physical weight, a pressure felt in the bones and the blood. It was a silence composed not of peace, but of 1,000 systems running in perfect, predatory stillness. Outside the reinforced viewport, the Crimson Nebula bled across the void, a shroud of ionized hydrogen and stellar dust that had hidden the Terran Mandate's entire Third Fleet for 3 agonizing weeks. Fleet Admiral Eva Rostova stood before the immense pane of transparent armor, her reflection a pale ghost against the backdrop of cosmic fire. She was a woman carved from ice and resolve, her dark hair pulled back in a severe regulation knot, her uniform immaculate despite the recycled air and the faint, ever-present scent of ozone and chilled metal. The silver insignia on her collar seemed to absorb the dim light of the command deck, offering no warmth. At her side, Sub-Commander Kalen monitored the cascade of data flowing across the central holographic display, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of his console. He was young, his face still holding the sharp lines of a recent academy graduate. Yet his eyes carried the weary weight of the campaigns that had forged humanity's desperate new reality. He had seen the aftermath of the Compact's peacekeeping on Jericho 7th and had helped ferry the frozen bodies of the colonists from the ruins of the orbital habitat at Cygnus X1. Like everyone under Rostova's command, he understood what failure here would mean. It would not be defeat. It would be extinction. The Galactic Compact, a sprawling, ancient coalition of species, had long viewed humanity as a useful, if volatile, tool. Excellent pioneers, tenacious soldiers for their proxy wars, and an endless source of novel resources from their high-gravity homeworld. They had been offered associate membership, a seat at the children's table, while their trade routes were throttled. Their colony claims were ignored, and their people were sacrificed on the altar of galactic stability. The final betrayal, the one that had ignited this silent, desperate rebellion, was the Orion incursion. When the insectoid Curex swarm had breached the outer sectors, the Compact's Grand Fleet had strategically withdrawn, rerouting to protect the established core worlds of the elder species while leaving the human colony of New Terra and its 8 million inhabitants directly in the swarm's path. The official communique had called it a tactical consolidation. Rostova, whose own brother had been stationed in New Terra's defense force, called it a culling. Now, humanity was done asking for a seat at the table. They were going to splinter it into 1,000 pieces. All strike groups report ready. Kalen's voice was a low tremor in the oppressive quiet. Phase 1 targets are locked. The Ghost Network is synchronized. Rostova didn't turn. Her gaze remained fixed on the nebula's swirling heart. Timing is absolute. Sub-Commander, a single microsecond of deviation and the cascade will fail. The Zethani First Fleet will be on us before we can even register our own demise. The target was not the First Fleet itself. That would be suicide. The Zethani were the Compact's loyal enforcers, a species of silicon-based sentinels whose crystalline warships were legends of durability and firepower. No, a direct confrontation was what they expected. It was what any primitive species would attempt. Rostova's plan was far more insidious. Their target was the jewel of the sector, the Anvil, a massive deep space relay and logistics station that served as the central nervous system for the entire galactic arm. It controlled fleet movements, managed supply chains, and processed quadrillions of bits of secure data every second. It was believed to be impregnable, protected not just by the Zethani fleet, but by layers of energy shielding so dense they could theoretically withstand a supernova. Humanity's weapon was not a bomb, but a virus delivered through a method the Compact couldn't conceive of. For years, Mandate science divisions had secretly perfected the Ghost Drive, a short-range FTL motor that didn't tear a hole in space-time but momentarily phased an object between dimensions. It was unstable, wildly inaccurate for travel, and consumed catastrophic amounts of energy. But for planting a microscopic parasite program directly onto the Anvil's shielded power conduits, bypassing every conventional defense, it was perfect. Dozens of stealth drones, deployed weeks ago, were now in position, their ghost drives spooled and synchronized. They wouldn't just shut the Anvil down, they would trigger a cascading power surge designed to overload and physically melt every primary and secondary system in the station, turning the Compact's greatest asset into a tomb of slag. 5 minutes to initiation, Kalen announced, his focus absolute. Long-range comms are intercepting traffic from the Zythani flagship. Standard patrol chatter. They have no idea we're here. Arrogance is the armor of the complacent, Rostova murmured. The words, a mantra she had repeated countless times. They believe we are still petitioning their subcommittees for aid. A soft chime echoed across the bridge. A priority communication request. Kalen's head snapped up. Ma'am, it's a compact diplomatic channel. Encrypted. Emissary level. Rostova's expression didn't change, but a flicker of cold fire ignited in her eyes. On screen. Audio only. The face of Zathar did not appear, but his voice, a resonant, harmonic chime translated into flawless Terran standard, filled the bridge. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, oozing a patient, condescending benevolence that Rostova found more insulting than any open threat. Admiral Rostova. The voice chimed. We had hoped to avoid this unfortunate escalation. The Compact acknowledges your people's grievances. The loss of New Terra was a tragedy. However, your recent military buildup and refusal to stand down your fleets is causing significant instability. It is the plea of the Grand Council that you cease this petulant display and return to the diplomatic process. We are even prepared to offer a formal inquiry into the events of the Orion incursion. Rostova let the silence hang for a long moment, savoring the emissary's assumption of control. She could picture him perfectly, a towering, crystalline entity from the Xylar species, pulsing with calm, superior inner light, certain he was dealing with a disobedient child. An inquiry. Emissary Rostova's voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. A committee to produce a report in 5 standard years that will conclude the Compact acted with regrettable necessity. We are no longer interested in your reports. A pause. The emissary's harmonic tone lost a fraction of its placidity. Your tone is unproductive. Admiral, the Zythani First Fleet is on station. They are the guarantors of peace in this sector. You cannot possibly believe your fledgling navy stands a chance against them. This is a path to self-destruction. 1 minute, Kalen whispered, his eyes glued to the chronometer. Rostova took a slow breath, her gaze meeting her own reflection in the viewport. You speak of peace, but you mean pacification. You speak of stability, but you mean servitude. You left 8 million of my people to die to protect your shipping lanes. Emissary, you didn't even have the decency to call it a sacrifice. You called it asset reallocation. The needs of the many, Zathar began, the ancient, tired excuse of tyrants everywhere. Do not lecture me on calculus, Rostova snapped, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You have spent a century teaching us the rules of your game, a game where human lives are the currency for your comfort. We have decided we no longer wish to play. 30 seconds. Kalen breathed. This is your final opportunity to avert disaster. Admiral. The emissary's voice was now tight with strained patience. Power down your weapon systems and submit to compact authority. Your people will be shown leniency. Rostova allowed a thin, cruel smile to touch her lips. It's too late for that. You see. You're still thinking of this as a negotiation. But this isn't a negotiation. This is a declaration. Her gaze shifted to Kalen. Execute! Kalen's fingers flew across his console. Ghost network activated. All drones reporting successful phase and delivery. Cascade initiated. On the main holographic display. A schematic of the anvil pulsed once. Then a spiderweb of angry red lines erupted from its core. Power readings spiked to impossible levels before flatlining. One after another, system after system winked out of existence. Admiral Rostova, what have you done? Zathar's voice was no longer calm. It was a discordant shriek of disbelief and fury. We have taken back our future, Rostova said simply. She gestured to the communications officer. Broadcast our declaration. Unencrypted. On all channels. Let the galaxy hear it. Across the sector, every speaker, every comm unit, every ship's bridge was flooded with her voice, clear and unwavering, listing every compact betrayal, every broken treaty, every sacrificed human life, culminating in the final, chilling proclamation of the Terran Mandate's secession and its intent to reclaim its sovereignty by any means necessary. The tactical display updated. The icons representing the Zythani First Fleet began to blink erratically. Their clean, organized formation broke as ships lost contact with their command and control. They were blind, deaf, and utterly confused. Their impenetrable fortress, the Anvil, had become a silent mausoleum, and with it, their umbilical cord to the compact was severed. Multiple secondary strikes confirmed. Kalen reported, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. Subspace comm relays in the 5 adjacent systems are dark. They're completely isolated. Zathar was still screaming, a torrent of threats and horrified accusations, but Rostova paid him no mind. Cut the channel, she ordered. The emissary's voice vanished, leaving the profound, ringing silence in its wake. She looked at the chaotic mess of the Zythani fleet, a predator caught in a trap it never knew existed. Her expression was hard, her heart a cold, steady drumbeat in the quiet of the bridge. The first part of the gamble had paid off. Now came the bloodshed. She turned to Kalen, her eyes reflecting the crimson glow of the nebula, the color of spilled blood and nascent stars. Signal the hunter-killer groups. The First Fleet is a wounded animal. Take them apart. The order, once given, was an avalanche. From the swirling crimson depths of the nebula, shadows detached themselves from the deeper blackness of space. They were not the grand as majestic vessels of the compact, but lean, predatory shapes built for speed and violence. The hunter-killer groups of the Terran Mandate. On the bridge of the Retribution, the main display became a tapestry of controlled chaos. Dozens of blue icons, the Viper-class frigates and Glaive-class cruisers, swarmed towards the scattered, flashing red icons of the Zithani First Fleet. The Zithani were trying to re-establish their network. Their comms channels, a frantic mess of conflicting signals as subordinate captains, cut off from the Anvil's guidance, attempted to assert authority or simply find their bearings. Humanity gave them no time. The first engagement was a masterpiece of brutality. Strike Group Epsilon, a pack of 6 Vipers led by the cruiser Stiletto, fell upon a Zithani Bastion-class vessel that had become isolated from its wingmen. The Zithani ship was a behemoth of crystalline armor, its weapon ports glowing with contained power. A fortress designed to withstand a fleet's broadside, but it was a fortress facing the wrong way. The Vipers didn't engage head-on. They treated the Bastion less like a warship and more like a massive, slow-moving beast. 2 frigates screamed past its bow, unleashing a volley of disruptive torpedoes that flared uselessly against its forward shields. A deliberate distraction. While the Bastion's automated defenses tracked the bait, the other 4 Vipers and the Stiletto emerged from below, their engines cold until the last second, and slammed their entire payload into the ship's vulnerable engine housing. Railgun slugs, hypervelocity spikes of depleted uranium, punched through the thinner rear shielding. Plasma lances followed, superheating the crystalline structure beyond its tolerance point. The rear third of the mighty Zithani warship didn't just explode, it shattered, blooming into a glittering cloud of incandescent shrapnel. The rest of the ship, its power core breached, went dark and tumbled lifelessly into the void. The entire engagement lasted 47 seconds. On the Retribution, Kalen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Ma'am, Strike Group Epsilon reports target neutralized. No losses." Rostova's eyes were fixed on the tactical display, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. They are a herd in a lightning storm. Kalen, confused, frightened. But they will rally. Their doctrine is rigid, but not suicidal. As if to prove her point, a cluster of red icons began to coalesce around the largest symbol on the board, the Zithani flagship, the Sentinel's Vigil. On its bridge, Sentinel Prime Vorlag, a being whose physical form was a towering column of interwoven, luminous crystals, felt a sensation his species had not experienced in millennia tactical blindness. The anvil was gone. His fleet's nervous system had been severed. The comms that remained were a cacophony of panicked, localized reports of ambushes from impossible vectors. These humans, these primitives, were not fighting like civilized beings. There were no battle lines, no honorable challenges, just the vicious, coordinated strikes of scavengers. "Restore fleet cohesion." His voice resonated through the bridge, a series of deep, harmonic tones. "All vessel and form a defensive perimeter around my position. We will weather this tantrum, and then we will methodically exterminate these insects." His sub-commanders, lesser crystalline forms, pulsed with anxious light. "Prime, we cannot track their movements. They appear and disappear within the nebula's interference. Their ships are smaller, faster. Then we shall make them come to us." Vorlag boomed. He gave a new set of commands. The Sentinel's Vigil and the dozen ships that had managed to reach it began to power up their main weapons, their shields flaring to maximum intensity. They formed a bastion of overlapping energy fields, a fortress of light in the crimson darkness. It was a predictable move, born of arrogance and a doctrine that had never before failed, and Rostova was waiting for it. Their turtling, Kalen observed, a note of triumph in his voice. "We have them." "No." Rostova corrected him, her voice a low counterpoint to his excitement. "We have their attention. That is a far more dangerous thing." She had studied the Zythani for years, read every translated manuscript on their philosophy of war. It was a philosophy of overwhelming force, of inevitability. When faced with an unconventional threat, they would revert to their most basic instinct, create an unbreachable point of strength, and dare the enemy to break against it. "He expects us to throw our frigates against his shields until our fleet is spent," she mused, more to herself than to her crew. "He believes we are impatient, emotionally driven." She tapped a command into her personal console. "All strike groups, cease direct engagement. Phase 2 begins now. I want every comm intercept from the Zythani fleet, every panicked whisper, every desperate damage report broadcast back at them on a continuous loop. Let them listen to their own death throes." The psychological assault was immediate and devastating. The Zythani, a species that valued order and unity above all else, were suddenly bombarded with the sounds of their own unraveling, the screams of crystalline structures fracturing under fire, the last harmonic cries of dying crews, the frantic, contradictory orders of isolated captains. All of it was amplified and repeated, an echo chamber of their own failure. On the bridge of the Sentinel's vigil, Vorlag's crystalline structure began to pulse with a furious, discordant light. Silence that noise. Find the source. But they couldn't. The signal came from everywhere and nowhere. Ghost transmissions from the very fabric of the nebula around them. While the Zythani fortress was deafened by its own fear, Rostova's hunter-killer groups began the real work. They didn't attack the fortress. They methodically hunted down the stragglers, the ships still trying to reach the safety of Vorlag's shield umbrella. One by one, red icons vanished from the tactical display, each a silent testament to another Zythani crew meeting a swift, brutal end in the dark. The battle became a grim, bloody equation. Yet, war is never clean. A warning klaxon suddenly blared on the Retribution's bridge. "Strike Group Gamma is taking heavy fire," Kalen shouted. "One of the bastions." It ignored the rally command. "It's flanking them." Rostova's eyes snapped to the flashing icon. A lone Zythani captain, acting on instinct or sheer terror, had broken from the herd and blundered into a perfect ambush position. The cruiser Dauntless was caught in its primary weapon array. On the screen, they saw it a lance of pure energy, blindingly white, slicing through the Dauntless's kinetic barriers as if they were paper. The Terran cruiser's spine snapped. A moment of horrific silence. Then it bloomed into a star of its own, a funeral pyre for its 400 crew members. Kalen stared, his face pale. He'd known the captain of the Dauntless. They'd graduated a year apart. For a fleeting second, the strategic icons on the map resolved back into what they truly were, ships full of living, breathing people. Rostova's expression remained unchanged, a mask of granite, but in her mind, she saw the face of her brother, smiling at her from a grainy photo taken on the day he'd shipped out to New Terra. The cost. The cost was always paid in blood. "All ships in that quadrant, converge and eliminate that bastion," she ordered, her voice devoid of any emotion. "And tell the Stiletto to launch its Wraith drones. It's time to break their fortress." The Wraith drones were another of humanity's ugly little secrets. They were essentially ghost drives strapped to small, high-yield plasma warheads. They didn't need to punch through shields. They phased through them, rematerializing inside a ship's hull for a catastrophic internal detonation. They were terrifyingly inaccurate, as likely to rematerialize in an empty corridor as in a primary reactor, but against a static, shielded target. They were ideal. On the bridge of the Sentinel's vigil, Vorlag watched in fury as his stranded ships were slaughtered. He had expected a charge. He had prepared for a siege. He had not prepared for this war of 1,000 cuts, this psychological torment. He was a commander of grand fleets, a maestro of overwhelming power, and he was being dismantled by vermin. Then his proximity alerts shrieked. A dozen small objects had simply appeared within his shield perimeter. "Impossible, report!" His tactical officer chimed in alarm before anyone could analyze the readings. The detonations began. Deep within the hulls of the ships surrounding the flagship, explosions erupted. One cruiser's bridge vanished in a flash of blue-white plasma. Another's weapon systems overloaded, its own cannons tearing it apart from the inside. The perfect, interlocking shield wall flickered and collapsed as ship after ship was crippled not by an outside force, but by an enemy that was already inside. The fortress was broken. "Ma'am," Kalen said, his voice steady once more, the professional soldier bearing the grieving friend. "Their formation is gone. They're exposed." Rostova watched the Zithani flagship, the Sentinel's vigil, now standing alone amidst the wreckage of its honor guard. It was wounded, but still immensely powerful. A cornered Leviathan. It would not surrender. It would fight to the last, and it would take as many human ships with it as it could. She had held her most powerful piece in reserve, the queen on the chessboard. Now, it was time to move. "Bring us about, Sub-Commander," she said, her voice dropping, carrying the weight of the moment. "Target the Sentinel's Vigil's command bridge. The Retribution will deliver the killing blow ourselves." A quiet, grim understanding settled over the bridge crew. The flagship, the heart of the Third Fleet, was entering the fray. This was no longer just a battle of tactics and strategy. This was an execution, and Admiral Eva Rostova was going to serve as her own headsman. The HCS Retribution began to move, its immense form gliding out of the nebula's thickest dust clouds, its spinal-mounted particle lance glowing with nascent, terrible energy, aimed directly at the heart of what remained of the Zithani First Fleet. The HCS Retribution was not designed for stealth. It was a dagger built for the heart, a Dominion-class heavy cruiser. It was the largest vessel in the Mandate's service, retrofitted with experimental energy coils that allowed its primary weapon, the spinal particle lance, to draw power directly from the ship's reactor core, delivering a single, devastating blast of concentrated energy. As the Retribution emerged from the nebula, its silhouette immense and terrifying against the distant, shattered anvil, the remaining Zithani ships finally registered a clear target. Sentinel Prime Vorlag, witnessing the internal collapse of his defensive line and the brazen approach of the human flagship, focused all his remaining fury. He had been taught that humans were reckless, impulsive, and prone to overconfidence. Rostova's maneuver, exposing her command vessel, confirmed his analysis, but it was a calculated recklessness he hadn't anticipated. "Target the enemy flagship." Vorlag resonated, directing the crippled but still functioning weapon systems of the Sentinel's Vigil and its handful of surrounding escorts. Concentrate fire, break their will, energy bolts, kinetic slugs, and disruptor beams converged on the Retribution. The Terran heavy cruiser, however, was designed to absorb punishment. Its layered kinetic barriers flared, absorbing the initial volleys, and its ablative armor plates steamed as they vaporized under the sheer heat of the plasma fire. Warning lights screamed on Rostova's bridge, but the structural integrity remained firm. Shields holding at 80%, dropping rapidly, Kalen reported, his face grimly focused. The concentrated fire is breaking through the outer layers. Maintain course, Rostova ordered, her hands resting lightly on the command railing. Lock the lance. Full charge. The crew worked with the frantic precision of those facing their final moments. Power rerouted, coils charged, the entire ship thrumming like a struck bell. The particle lance, a mile-long spine running the length of the ship, gathered its energy, a brilliant white focus point growing at its tip, humming with the promise of utter destruction. The Zythani were relentless, recognizing this singular, critical threat. One remaining Zythani battlecruiser, the unyielding Resolve, moved to intercept, attempting to put its massive bulk between the Retribution and the flagship. Rostova didn't hesitate. Hunter-killer groups, break off from pursuit. Intercept the Resolve. Do not allow them to engage the flagship. The Hunter-killer Vipers, having spent the last hour methodically dismantling the fleet's stragglers, turned with immediate obedience. The battle around the main confrontation intensified tenfold as the Vipers swarmed the Resolve, overwhelming its damaged defenses in a concentrated, desperate attack. Meanwhile, the Retribution's kinetic shields dropped to critical levels. A massive Zythani plasma torpedo punched through the forward barriers, impacting the armor plating just forward of the bridge. The entire cruiser shuddered violently. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the deck plating warped beneath their boots. Emergency alarms wailed. Hull breach on decks 3 and 4. Reactor coupling stressing, Kalen shouted, fighting to stabilize his board. Rostova was thrown against the railing, but recovered instantly, her focus never leaving the view of the rapidly approaching Zythani flagship. Engineering. Report. We are holding. Admiral Core is stable, a lance charge at 90%. The engineer's voice crackled over the comms, strained but clear. Weapons officer. Distance to target. Firing solution in 3 seconds. Admiral. 2 kilometers and closing. On the Sentinel's vigil, Sentinel Prime Vorlag recognized the human strategy too late. The small ships had been a distraction. The cruiser Resolve had been a pawn. The human admiral was risking everything on one final, devastating strike. He poured all available power into his forward shielding, the crystalline plating flaring a magnificent, desperate purple. Brace for impact, he resonated, knowing the futility of the command. Fire. Rostova's order was quiet, yet it rang across the bridge like a hammer blow. The HCS Retribution unleashed its fury. The particle lance fired not with a bang, but with a silent, blinding intensity. A pure, focused beam of energy, brighter than a localized nova, shot across the infinitesimal distance between the two flagships. It struck the Sentinel's vigil's primary shields. For a microsecond, the purple energy shield flared in resistance, attempting to defuse the blast, but the sheer, overwhelming power of the Terran weapon was too much. The shield buckled, fractured, and collapsed. The beam drove directly into the Zythani flagship's bridge tower. The crystalline structure, so vaunted for its resilience, melted like ice under a blowtorch. The beam penetrated straight through the command center, severing the Vigil's spine and plunging into its reactor core. The resulting explosion was not subtle. It was a cataclysm. The Sentinel's Vigil disintegrated, ripping itself apart in a silent, blinding vortex of light and superheated plasma, leaving behind nothing but a rapidly expanding sphere of incandescent debris. The shockwaves slammed into the Retribution, tossing the immense cruiser like a toy. Emergency systems kicked in. The lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into the deep red glow of reserve power. Smoke curled from several consoles. Silence returned, thick and choking. Kalen shakily activated his primary display. The entire Zythani First Fleet was gone. The red icons had vanished. The blue icons, though battered, were all present. The Retribution was crippled but alive. "Report," Rostova commanded, her voice raspy, fighting to draw air into her lungs. "The Sentinel's Vigil is confirmed destroyed," Kalen reported, his voice filled with hollow victory. "No remaining command structure. Remaining scattered escorts are initiating immediate deep space jump or surrendering to our hunter-killers. We won, Admiral." Rostova walked to the viewport, which was now cracked and starred by the impact. She looked out at the silent, burning wreckage of the once mighty Zythani fleet, at the dying lights of the Anvil station. Victory. It tasted like ash and burnt circuitry. "We have secured the sector," she stated, ignoring the cheer that rippled briefly through the surviving crew. "But the compact will be moving. This strike will be felt throughout the galaxy." She knew what would happen next. The immediate political fallout would be catastrophic for the compact. The loss of the Anvil and an entire First Fleet, especially a Zythani one, was not just a military setback. It was a shattering blow to the perception of their invincibility. It was the first time in memory an associate species had achieved such a definitive, calculated victory over one of the core powers. Within hours, the galaxy was aflame with the news. Terran Mandate media, operating from deep space relay stations that the compact had overlooked, broadcast the entire battle, uncensored the clinical execution of the Zythani, the horrifying destruction of the flagship. They played Rostova's declaration on a continuous loop, on countless worlds. Populations, long suppressed under the compact's heavy hand, stirred. The seed of rebellion, planted by the Mandate's defiance, began to germinate. Rostova didn't allow for celebration. The Retribution was too damaged to hold the line alone. "Kalen, initiate repairs. We have 48 hours until the compact can coordinate a massive retaliatory force from the next sector over. Contact Fleet Marshal Tyrus. We need the 2nd and 5th Fleets here immediately to establish the initial jump fortifications." Her focus was already shifting from battle to defense, from rebellion to empire building. They had declared war, and now they had to hold their ground. Meanwhile, in the compact's capital, the massive orbital station known as the Nexus, panic was total. The Grand Council convened in a frantic emergency session. The crystalline emissary Zathar, who had so condescendingly dismissed Rostova, was now writhing with frantic, distressed light. "They must be sanctioned exterminated," he chittered, his harmonic voice shattered by fear. "This is not war. It is calculated barbarism. They destroyed the Anvil. Grand Marshal Krell, the military commander of the massive reptilian Cathar race, slammed his armored tail onto the marble floor of the chamber. The Zythani were too reliant on centralized command. Their antiquated doctrines failed. We must deploy the Cathar Ninth Invasion Fleet, overwhelming force to scour the Terran Mandate from the star charts. But others, representatives of the more cautious, politically motivated species, were paralyzed by fear. The humans hadn't just fought, they had humiliated the compact. If we deploy the Ninth, what happens to the outer rims? Whispered Ambassador Lyra, a fragile avian being whose species had long profited from stability. The Thracian Alliance is already mobilizing near Sector Gamma. This chaos, it benefits too many of our enemies. Director Malchus, head of the Compact's dreaded Intelligence Directorate CID, watched the proceedings in stony silence. He was a creature of shadow and cold logic, his pale, bulbous head pulsing faintly as he processed the data. He stepped forward, his voice a dry, echoing whisper. Grand Council, the issue is not merely the loss of a fleet. The issue is how they struck. Surgical precision, deep infiltration, complete cyber warfare dominance. They used their primitive status to mask the development of weapons we dismissed as theoretical. This Admiral Rostova, she is a greater threat than any armed fleet. Malchus pointed to a screen displaying Rostova's stern, unyielding face. Direct confrontation is what she wants. She wants to draw our massive, slow fleets into predictable engagements. We will not play her game. We will not commit our core fleets to a protracted war against a species that values sacrifice over survival. He paused, letting the fear build. We will use their own nature against them. We will starve them, fracture them, and tear them apart from within. We initiate Operation Scourge. The terror on the faces of the remaining council members was palpable. Operation Scourge was the CID's ultimate destabilization protocol, reserved for situations where open war was deemed too costly. It meant terror, sabotage, and the utter breakdown of social order on the target worlds. Is that truly necessary? Director Zathar pleaded. Yes, Malchus whispered. We will not let them grow into an empire. We will return them to their cages, or we will ensure there is nothing left to cage. Contact the shadow cells. Activate all deep cover assets on Earth and its primary colonies. The war has just moved from the stars to the streets. Back in the Crimson Nebula, Admiral Rostova stood among the flickering lights of the Retribution. She had won the first battle, paid for with the lives of her crew and the structural integrity of her flagship. But she knew Malchus would be moving. She knew the compact would not stop. She looked at Kalen. The war is not over, Sub-Commander. It has only just begun. She issued her next command, preparing for the inevitable counterblow that would not come from space, but from the shadow of their own cities. They had secured their borders with steel, but now they had to defend their homes from a hidden enemy. The victory at the Crimson Nebula was not celebrated with parades or grand speeches. It was marked by the grim, relentless work of repair and consolidation. The HCS Retribution, its hull scarred and its systems a patchwork of emergency overrides, became the de facto capital of the newly christened Terran sector. For weeks, the silence of deep space was broken only by the whine of plasma cutters and the low thrum of fabrication units as humanity frantically fortified its first conquest. Admiral Rostova did not rest. She drove her crews, her engineers, and herself with a cold, relentless fervor. Sleep was a luxury, a weakness she could not afford. The compact was wounded, its pride shattered. But it was not dead. It was a cornered Leviathan, and she knew its next strike would not be against her fleets, but against the heart of the mandate itself. The first reports were small, almost dismissible as accidents or local system failures. A primary power conduit on Mars's Olympus Mons shipyard overloaded, setting back production of 3 new cruisers by a month. A vital shipment of refined helium-3 from the gas refineries of Jupiter vanished between jump points, its transponder simply winking out of existence. A communications blackout isolated the farming colony on Kepler 186f for 12 hours, causing a wave of civil unrest. Individually, they were incidents. Collectively, they were a pattern, a death by 1,000 cuts. "It's Director Malkus," Rostova stated, her voice flat, during a strategy session on the now-restored bridge of the Retribution. The holographic display before her showed not enemy fleet positions, but a map of the Sol system, dotted with dozens of these flashing amber alerts. "Operation Scourge. He's bypassing the military front entirely. He's waging war on our logistics, our morale, our food supply." Oh, Kalen, his face etched with a permanent weariness that had aged him a decade in a matter of weeks, traced a line of compromised data networks. The infiltrators must have been in place for years. Ma'am, deep cover agents, saboteurs, they could be anyone. Dock workers, system administrators, even colonial government officials. The implications were terrifying. The enemy was no longer a crystalline warship on a view screen. It was the friendly face in the mess hall, the trusted technician in engineering, the neighbor next door. The war had come home. The confirmation of their fears arrived with a wave of coordinated terror. On Earth, in the sprawling arcology of Neo-Denver, a synchronized series of explosions crippled the city's primary water purification system. Almost simultaneously, on the orbital station Terra Prime, a virulent, engineered plague was released into the life support. A fast-acting pathogen that was only contained after the lockdown and horrific sacrifice of 3 entire residential sectors. The official mandate news networks called the perpetrators compact loyalist insurgents, but Rostova knew the truth. These were the shadow cells, the elite surgical tools of the Compact Intelligence Directorate. The public, once united in a fervor of defiant patriotism, began to fracture. Fear was a powerful acid, dissolving unity and replacing it with suspicion. Hoarding began. Black markets thrived. Local militias, once a source of pride, became objects of paranoia. Was the captain of the local planetary defense force a patriot, or a compact mole waiting for the signal to turn his weapons on his own people? Rostova met this insidious threat with her own brand of cold brutality. She established a new branch of the Mandate Military, an organization that answered only to her, the Internal Security Directorate, grimly nicknamed the Black Watch. They were given unprecedented authority to investigate, detain, and interrogate any suspected collaborator. Due process became a casualty of war. Black-clad watch officers became a common, feared sight in orbital stations and colonial cities. Kalen watched this transformation with growing unease. He had enlisted to fight ships, to defend humanity's borders. He had not signed up to police his own people, to see fear in the eyes of civilians as he walked past. The shift was crystallized for him when a priority comm arrived from his own home colony, Proxima III. A shadow cell had detonated a dirty bomb in the capital city's primary spaceport, not to cause mass casualties, but to contaminate the port with radioactive isotopes, effectively cutting the colony off from interstellar trade for months. His younger sister was a cargo pilot based out of that port. Her status was listed as unaccounted for. The strategic icon on the map was no longer an abstract problem. It was a wound in his own heart. He found Rostova in the observation deck, staring out at the star field, her expression as unreadable as ever. "Admiral," he began, his voice tight. "The methods of the Black Watch, the public detentions, the suspension of local law. People are afraid. We fought the compact to be free, not to live under a military lockdown." Rostova turned, her eyes seeming to look straight through him. "Freedom is a concept, Kalen. Survival is a reality. Malchus is using our own ideals against us. He believes our sentiment, our compassion for our own, is a weakness he can exploit. He expects us to hesitate, to be bound by the very laws we are fighting to protect." Her voice dropped. "He is wrong. To defeat a monster, you must be willing to become a more efficient monster. We will root out this cancer by any means necessary." "And what if we cut out so much of ourselves that we die from the cure?" Kalen challenged, the grief for his sister fueling his courage. For the first time, a flicker of something other than cold resolve crossed Rostova's face. It was not sympathy, but a shared, buried pain. Every soldier who has ever fought has asked that question. Sub-commander, the only answer is to win. Because if we lose, the question becomes irrelevant. The breakthrough they needed came from the unlikeliest of sources. On a grimy freighter depot orbiting Europa, a low-level data clerk, a human named Joraid, was caught attempting to slice into the Mandate's new military logistics network. Under the Black Watch's persuasive interrogation, he broke. Joraid was not a high-level agent, but he was a communications node. He confessed to receiving coded instructions from a handler, instructions that he would then pass on to other assets. He didn't know their names or faces, only their drop points and authentication codes. More importantly, he revealed the existence of a central coordinating intelligence behind the chaos, a single entity known only as Cerberus. Cerberus was the head of the snake, the brain of the shadow cells in the Terran sector. Rostova now had a target. But it was a ghost. Cerberus could be anywhere, commanding the disparate cells through layers of encrypted, anonymous relays. Hunting Cerberus would be like trying to catch smoke, so she decided to force the smoke to reveal its shape. With the intelligence gleaned from Jorad, the Black Watch began to weave a web of misinformation. They leaked falsified shipping manifests, altered fleet readiness reports, and fabricated intelligence about a critical weakness in Earth's orbital defense grid. It was bait, a piece of meat so tantalizingly large that Cerberus would have to consolidate its assets for a single, decisive strike. The bait was taken. Encrypted chatter intercepted by the Black Watch surged. The disparate cells were coordinating. A plan was forming. The target, according to the fabricated leak, was a high-level summit of the entire Terran Mandate High Command, including Fleet Marshal Tyrus and Rostova herself, to be held aboard the orbital station Olympus Ascendant above Mars. It was the perfect target, a single strike to decapitate the entire human war effort. On the bridge of the Retribution, now a tense, silent nerve center, Rostova and Kalen watched the trap close. "They're moving their assets into position," Kalen reported. "Sabotage teams are being activated on the Olympus Ascendant. We have them." "We have the pawns," Rostova countered, her eyes narrowed. Cerberus is too smart to be on that station. He will be watching from a secure location, ready to vanish the moment the attack succeeds or fails. The attack itself is the final piece of misdirection. Her console chimed. A message from the Black Watch, flagged with the highest priority. Her face went rigid as she read it. The blood drained from Kalen's face as he saw the update appear on the main screen. A massive biocontaminant had just been detected, venting into the atmospheric processors of the colony on Titan. A fast-acting, genetically engineered neurotoxin. It wasn't a diversionary tactic. It was a genuine, full-scale atrocity. 12 million people. My God, Kalen whispered. The summit was the diversion. Titan is the real target. No, Rostova said, her voice a terrifying, dead calm. They are both the real targets. She understood Malchus's brutal calculus instantly. The attack on Titan was real, designed to draw the Mandate's primary relief and medical fleets away from Mars. The attack on the summit was also real, timed to strike the moment the High Command was distracted and vulnerable. It was a brilliant, horrifyingly effective checkmate. But Rostova saw one move Malchus hadn't. Cerberus would have to give the final activation order to the teams on Olympus Ascendant. That order, that single burst of data, would be the only moment the Ghost would reveal its position. She had to choose. She could divert the fleet, save the 12 million people on Titan, and allow Cerberus to escape into the shadows to continue his campaign of terror indefinitely. Or she could sacrifice Titan, let the atrocity unfold, and use that moment of distraction to pinpoint and eliminate the head of the snake, potentially ending the internal war in one fell swoop. Kalen looked at her, his eyes wide with horror, already knowing the choice she was going to make. He saw the cold, hard math being calculated behind her eyes. He thought of his sister on Proxima 3, of the civilians dying on Terra Prime, and now of the 12 million souls on Titan. Rostova turned to her comms officer, her face a mask of iron. Lock down all outgoing communication from this sector. No relief fleet is to be dispatched to Titan. Signal the Black Watch. The moment the activation signal for the Olympus attack is sent, they are to triangulate and strike. No matter the source, no matter the cost, she had made her choice. She would let a world die to save a nation. On the bridge of the Retribution, the silence was no longer one of predatory stillness. It was the silence of a tomb. The minutes that followed Admiral Rostova's order were the longest in Kalen's life. The bridge of the HCS Retribution became a hermetically sealed chamber of dread. On one screen, the tactical plot showed the fake summit on Olympus Ascendant, the hidden compact assets moving into their final strike positions like spiders closing a web. On another, a cascade of Priority 1 distress calls flooded in from the Titan colony, a torrent of terrified voices, garbled data streams showing atmospheric toxicity climbing at an impossible rate, and then, slowly, silence. A rolling, horrifying silence that crept across the colony's commnet as 12 million lives were extinguished. Kalen stood at his station, his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles bloodless. He did not look at Rostova. He couldn't. He listened to a world die, knowing the order to stand down and let it happen had come from the woman standing 10 feet away. He felt a profound internal break, the snapping of a cord of loyalty and belief that could never be repaired. Rostova stood impassive, her gaze fixed on the data stream from the Black Watch. She had walled off the horror, compartmentalized the cost. She was a surgeon with a patient on the table, and sentiment was a tremor that would cause her hand to slip. Then it came. A single encrypted data burst, vanishingly brief, fired from a secure location towards the sabotage teams on Olympus Ascendant. It was the kill order. Signal acquired, the comms officer barked, his voice cracking with tension, triangulating. The source isn't military. It's a civilian channel, heavily shielded, originating from a Xylarian-flagged diplomatic courier, the Starlight Serenity, currently holding a stationary orbit in the asteroid belt. A diplomatic courier, hiding in plain sight, cloaked in neutrality and peace. It was Malchus's brand of perfect, cynical arrogance. "That's him," Rostova said, her voice a blade of ice. "Dispatch the Black Watch strike cruiser Nyx. Intercept and board. I want Cerberus alive. The network data in his head is more valuable than his life." She turned, and her eyes finally met Kalen's. In his gaze, she saw not insubordination, but a deep, sorrowful judgment that was worse than any mutiny. "The cost was high, Sub-Commander," she said, her voice for once lacking its iron certainty. "But the war against the shadows is not won with fleets. It is won with scalpels. The Nyx, a vessel designed for silence and speed, detached from its hidden mooring and vanished into a slip-space jump. The operation was brutally efficient. The Starlight Serenity, with its civilian crew and diplomatic credentials, had no meaningful defenses. Within minutes, Black Watch commandos in void black armor breached the hull. The feed from their helmet cams played on the Retribution's main screen. They swept through pristine corridors, past terrified Xylarian diplomats, their movements precise and utterly ruthless. They found him on the ship's private observation deck, a single human figure standing before a vast viewport, watching the distant light of Sul. He was an older man, distinguished, with graying temples and the calm, patient air of a seasoned academic. Kalen recognized him from the historical archives. It was Ambassador Valerius, the Mandate's former chief envoy to the Compact, a man who had spent 30 years arguing for humanity's peaceful integration. "Admiral Rostova," Valerius said, his voice calm as the Black Watch soldiers surrounded him, their weapons leveled. He was speaking to his captors, but addressing the woman he knew was watching. "I assume your trap was successful." Rostova's voice, piped through the lead commando's helmet, was a cold whisper. "Valerius, you, of all people, you preached peace and unity." "I still do," the former ambassador replied, a sad smile touching his lips. "I believe in the order and stability the Compact provides. You and your rebellion are a chaotic anomaly, a disease that threatens 1,000 years of peace for the sake of primitive pride. I did what was necessary to preserve the whole." The screen showed the dying light of Titan reflected in the viewport behind him. 12 million people, Valerius. Was that necessary? Rostova asked. A tragic but acceptable cost to prevent a galactic war that would kill trillions. He answered without hesitation. "You made a similar calculation yourself just now, didn't you? Admiral sacrificing Titan to catch me. You see, in the end, we are more alike than you care to admit. The only difference between us is the scale of our ambition." "Take him," was all Rostova said. The feed cut out. The head of the snake was severed. With Cerberus's capture, the entire shadow cell network collapsed. The data retrieved from his neural implants allowed the Black Watch to roll up every remaining agent, every saboteur, every collaborator within 72 hours. Operation Scourge was over. The internal war was won. The bridge of the Retribution was silent. The distress calls from Titan had long since ceased. The victory felt like a funeral. Kalen turned to Rostova. "I request a transfer, Admiral." His voice was hollow, devoid of its previous fire. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much. "I can no longer serve on this bridge." Rostova looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of the fleet admiral slipped, and she was just Ava Rustova, a woman carrying the weight of worlds on her shoulders. She saw in Kalen the part of herself she had been forced to kill to win this war. "Where will you go?" she asked quietly. "To the relief efforts on Proxima 3, he said, the name of his home, the memory of his sister, grounding him. "I'll command a supply freighter. I'll rebuild what was broken. That is a war I still understand." Rostova nodded slowly. "Your transfer is approved, Commander." He offered no salute. He simply turned and walked off the bridge, leaving an empty space at the command console and a profound void in the silence he left behind. In the days that followed, Rostova executed her final masterful stroke. She did not hide the atrocity on Titan. She broadcast it. She sent the unedited comm logs, the final terrified messages, the Black Watch's analysis of the compact-engineered neurotoxin, and the full confession of Ambassador Valerius to every system in the known galaxy. She laid bare the compact's depravity, its willingness to commit genocide and betray its own agents to maintain power. The effect was seismic. The compact's political foundation, already cracked by their military defeat, shattered completely. Species that had remained neutral out of fear now recoiled in disgust. Key allies, horrified at the revelation of Operation Scourge, formally withdrew from the Council. The Cathar Ninth Fleet was recalled to quell rebellions on its own borders. Director Malchus was censured, his career and the CID's reputation ruined. The Galactic Compact, as a unified entity, was effectively dead, collapsing not from a final battle, but under the weight of its own monstrous sins. Humanity had won. It stood now not as a rebellious sector, but as the anchor of a new, emerging coalition of independent worlds, forged in defiance and bound by a shared enemy. Admiral Eva Rostova stood alone on the observation deck of the HCSL Retribution, looking out at the endless sea of stars. She had saved her people. She had carved out an empire from the ashes of betrayal. She had paid an unimaginable price, sacrificing a world to win a war and a piece of her own soul to secure the peace. Her reflection stared back at her from the transparent armor, a pale, solitary ghost against the backdrop of a galaxy she had broken and remade in her own image. The stars offered no congratulations, no solace. They stared back, cold and unforgiving, reflecting the empire she had built and the woman she had become to build it.